I actually wasn't planning on playing the Golden Eagle, to be honest. I condemned it like many others to being DOA, and when I eventually did decide I fancied trying it out, my first 10 or so games were pretty dreadful, with my teams imploding and I wasn't playing much better. But these rough streaks happen in the world of 16v16 top tier, so take a break and come back another day. And since then, honestly, I quite like it. I've spent such a long time playing the 27SM during the past tournament season that I forgot how good aces feel these days. Obviously, it's no secret that the AMRAAM is not a versatile missile, and if you get up close to anything with a better flight model or better missiles, so your direct competition at 14.3 in the Rafale, Euro and Su-30, unless the other player is worse than you or makes an error, you'll be losing. But if you play consistently, you can often overcome these airframes. You just need the mental resilience to accept that sometimes you couldn't do anything. If all you're after is the best plane, then you're only going to be playing basically one airframe every patch, often for multiple patches at a time. It's going to get power crept very immediately with the upcoming patch. All I can do for now is comment on its current state. I'm aware there's various people saying it should have different engines or double racks or something like that. So just to clarify, I literally have no idea what all these airframes do or do not have in real life. Generally, I'm not that interested in that kind of stuff. I just play the stuff we have in game for what they are and decide if I like them or not. And to be honest, because of the radar and extra Fox 3 count, I do actually rate this above the Eurofighter for AirRB, and that is the non-Acer version, to be clear if you're watching after the December update. Sure, a good player in a Euro should come out on top, but we're not talking 1v1, we're talking 16v16. The reality is, if you have a decent chunk of missiles and a good radar as a bonus, you can do well at top tier. With F-15s in the past, excluding the JM of course, because the AM4s add a lot to that, I find they're very one-dimensional. You can bully people mid to long range, but if they're good enough to get close to you, then it's kind of over. The missing piece of the puzzle is the radar. Whilst generally speaking you are still going to be in trouble if people get close to you, because at the end of the day you are still using the AMRAAMs, as I mentioned, it does double down on the one thing it's good at, and if my plane is going to be a kind of one-trick pony, I want it to do that trick well. It's not good close range and it's never going to be, so it may as well double down on the mid to long range gameplay. As much as that is a bit of a meme in War Thunder, it still works. Getting high and using the top-down Datalink trick in this feels fantastic in particular. So with that in mind, let's get to some LARPing and do some showing rather than telling. First up is a simple Datalink clip, primarily to give the usual explainer for anyone new who doesn't know what I'm talking about. As I fire at this M2K below me here, you're going to notice as he gets into the notch, the familiar Datalink ring appears around my target on my TWS scope. This is because a Fox 3 looking below the horizon will switch to IOG, and by extension IOG plus Datalink if you hold your lock. Be it soft lock or hard lock, both will work. This means despite the missile being notched, my own radar is keeping it on target, and the Acer on the F-15GE is incredibly good at this. This is something you'd usually want to take advantage of in an F-15, and now you have a very reliable radar to pull it off. Looking at the Mirage POV, you can see how the missile is just stuck to him despite being notched. One other thing I wanted to touch on briefly before I go through some full games is of course the main downside to the GE, and that is close range. If you do end up out of position or someone is good enough to push and isolate you, then yes, you can't really compete if they know what they're doing. In this first clip here, I was tunnel visioning a bit on the players below me, ignoring the incoming Rafale on my RWR. As a result, I have to notch without returning fire. Luckily for me, the Rafale doesn't fully pressure me and allows me to recommit though. But when we're fighting at this altitude, this close and at these speeds, you cannot really rely on the AMRAAM at all. I know I need to pull my nose in almost head on to even have a chance of it pulling in, but even then the Rafale can just use their energy and simply outpull my missile, pitching up away from it. Whilst the Rafale doesn't take me out, I'm now pincered by their team and my game is over. This next one is a game where I was going to be dying regardless. My team had collapsed and I kind of end up here with multiple people pushing me at the same time, and I've just got no teammates left really to help me out. So they all seem to be roughly on my left, so I can shove periodic on, put them all in a relative notch, just make sure that there's no missiles ahead of you. A missile chasing you is better than a missile coming on your nose, of course. And I'm just varying my altitude, just trying to notch all these launches and just see if I can have a bit of fun defending, maybe sneak away with a kill or two before I die. Now after I notch this missile, I do actually catch one on my tail, but I get a bit lucky with the damage RNG, so I'm still kind of functional, and I'm going to pull into these two Rafales here. Now both of these are ambitious launches. A lot of missiles wouldn't hit these. Mika's probably would, maybe an R-77. It's hard to tell without, setting up the exact scenario, but the AMRAAM just can't. I can pick up the kill on this Typhoon, but that's purely because they allowed it to happen. If you look at this similar shot on the Rafale afterwards, the missile is defeated because it just takes too long to start pulling in off the rail. Despite being an almost completely rear aspect shot, the Rafale simply pitches up to pull out of it, and my game ends shortly afterwards. Now let's move on to some full games and where this airframe excels, and to do that I want to talk about radar control. I've explained in the past why I prefer cyclic targeting to manual queuing due to the target snapping feature. The downside is early game like here, when there's a lot of clutter, even using a narrow TWS scope. One thing I really recommend you make use of now, in particular with these ASA radars, is the new option you have when using the show mouse cursor keybind like I am here. Now I can manually designate targets on my TWS scope without using manual queuing. I pan my camera to the right just to make sure that my team are engaging the people in the middle, so I'm not really that interested in the big BVR phase down the mid generally, as long as my team are doing that for me. It means I'm free to engage these stragglers on the left, and again I'm going to use my show mouse cursor bind just to designate the two targets, so I don't have to worry about tabbing through my cyclic keybind and that taking me through all the other targets on the right on my TWS scope that I'm not worried about right now. Now I would usually hold the data link further, but I could see that the flanker was flying low and he'd fired an ER, so I'm pretty confident that he's just going to try multipath and hold his lock. If I don't get the kill, I want to make sure that I'm focusing on defending. I'm not going to take any chances here. The fact is, if he is just flying straight and multipathing, I don't need the full data link. The missile will find him, and he's not likely to notch, and he doesn't, he gets taken out, so the ER will go dead. And now I'm in that usual position of having to fly in towards the furball. I explained in my last video that going hard left at the start like this does kind of leave you unable to help if your team collapses, but whether you want to get involved in the chaos more earlier on to try and prevent it is your call. I get decent results playing how I do, and it's what I enjoy, which is the important factor. Now as I'm flying in here, I've been tracking that J10 back for a while, who started off on my side of the map, but he's going cold at 25 kilometers, so it's unlikely my missile's going to reach him. Very easy for him to defeat that. So I'm going to unlock my mouse, look for anyone flying towards me. That says it's a rocket, so it shouldn't be a plane, something I need to worry about. And this is one of the benefits of cyclic targeting. As I start using my cyclic bind, it just snaps me to an F-18 that I didn't know about, that I would have struggled to find using my mouse or manual queuing. Cyclic can often reduce your reaction times and the amount of work you have to do managing your radar. And then again here, after I turn my radar off just to clear the memory and get rid of all the clutter on it, I'm going to turn it back on, and I'm just going to look on my bottom left because that's where I'm expecting there might be a couple of guys. And there we go, it immediately snaps to that Gripen. I didn't know there was a Gripen there, I just used my radar and cyclic targeting to snap to it. Now I'm going to pause briefly because there's a few things that happen after this that I want to cover, and I can't quite do it in the short amount of time that passes in the game. So my TWS auto snapping to that Gripen is the benefit of cyclic, as I explained. Downside is when no matter how much you hit the change target bind, it simply doesn't go where you want it, even if there's not much clutter on your scope. I just couldn't get it to select this flanker, my soft lock wouldn't budge. Now, you may be tempted to switch to HMD here, which on some airframes may well still be the best choice, but unless you absolutely need to act as fast as possible, resist this temptation. What you'll see me do instead is once again use the unlock mouse cursor bind to designate this target and fire. Why do this instead of HMD? Simple, data link. ACEs have a nice bonus feature that they continue to track targets that move off of your scan. I'll just play it through briefly and pause again after I switch my lock and fire at the flanker. Now this should look familiar. The data link ring has appeared around the Gripen as they try to notch the missile. Because we have an ASA, it is continuing to both track and provide data link updates for a missile tracking a target and no longer on my TWS scope. As long as the target remains within your radar limits, this will keep happening. Playing it through now as I pick up both these kills, as always emphasizing the importance of altitude, and the Golden Eagle especially thrives on these top-down attacks with data link, so you can maximize the potential of the ASA AMRAAM combo. I'll show you the sensor view as well. Keep an eye on the Gripen at the top of the screen whilst I switch lock to fire at the flanker. You'll see the missile switch to IOG plus DL whilst the Gripen notches. The missile stays on target and relocks as they leave the notch. Coming back to the live clip now, I was guilty of a bit of tunnel vision, ignoring a J10 oncoming on my RWR, so this means when he does fire at me, I don't have the time to get a missile back. So the J10 could have full pressured me here, and I probably would have been dead. As it is, he lets me recommit to get the shot, and I'm going relatively slow right now, so it's very easy for me to flick my plane back round into the notch. He opts to just fly straight into mine. He could have notched that perfectly easily. Realistically, I should have lost that engagement. A J10 has better missiles for short range jousting and a better flight model, but this loops back to the point I made at the start. If you keep playing well, you will beat better airframes in these situations. You just have to learn to accept that if they also play well, there's not much you can do. Finally, at the end here, I'm just flying over to the last couple of players. When I spot a missile diamond on my right, I quickly fish around with my HMD, pick up the lock and fire. Quick note here that hard locks are a fair amount weaker than TWS soft locks. You see how it switches to track mem, and I have to manually reacquire him as he moves out the other side of the notch, which would have broken my data link if it was a factor. TWS would have held this absolutely fine. Regardless, he fails to maintain the notch, the missile does reacquire him and he gets taken out. Start of the next one, and it's a very similar early game as before. As you see me looking to my right this time though, you'll notice that there's a ton of people on my team and they're going to fire a ton of missiles. If this is happening, you really want to avoid wasting your own. Remember, everyone they're firing at is already being pressured, and if they get the kills, remember, unless you're at the front with the most energy, your missile probably isn't getting there first, so it's not going to be your kill regardless. I'm simply once again looking for stragglers on the flank. There's no one coming directly for me, but this Eurofighter is turning this way to presumably notch from my teammates in the middle, so this is a decent shot to take. At this point you may have noticed I do take 2 C5s along with 6 120Bs. The Bs or As are generally better as they are a tad more versatile with a little more pull off the rail for close range. Now whilst they don't really trade off much in regards to range, the C5s do technically retain their energy a little better in these long range shots. It's marginal and I don't know for certain if this shot here for example would have hit with either missile, but I do take a couple of C5s for my first 2 launches each game as they are typically my longest range shots. Once again, in the background you should notice I'm once more keeping my data link, and despite moving out of the gimbal limit to notch occasionally, the target was held in memory, so I keep the connection and secure the kill. I'll switch over to sensor view again and note the fact that I'm still getting data link as they notch here despite not being top down, or at least not what you'd consider top down. If you watched Catworth's recent video about notching and seeker mechanics, you'll know that a Fox 3 switches to IOG and by extension IOG plus DL for relatively flat aspects. I won't repeat all that here, just go give his video a watch, link in the description. This Euro is desperately trying to notch this missile, but they aren't considering the data link aspect. They need to be focusing on maintaining the notch and changing trajectory a lot more aggressively, or using their energy and trying to go cold and bleed it out. The key mistake is allowing the missile to drift behind them, allowing it to relock fully and collect the kill. Straight after this, we once again see the advantage of cyclic. As I pan my TWS scope over, I get an insta-lock on a Rafale and then switch to a flanker to fire at both. The Rafale overcommits trying to return fire and gets taken out whilst the flanker notches. Now I did switch to my HMD anticipating a joust with the Rafale, so I used that to get a second launch on the flanker, and this is going to be why you should try and stick to your TWS where you can. As soon as I break the hard lock on the flanker, my data link connection is lost and I am unable to pick it up again, even if I relock him. Once you fully lose your lock, data link cannot be re-established. So if I was using TWS, I would be able to keep the flanker within my radar limits and abuse the features of my ACER whilst looking for my next targets. I hardlock the same flanker again now and look at my radar scope to see how the data link is no longer centered on the target and that missile is essentially dead. I do fire with hardlock again, but this time I'm going to commit to holding it to maintain my data link as they try to notch the missile. Of course now I lose a lot of situational awareness and the ability to fire at other targets, which I would have had using TWS here. I fire with a hard lock at this Rafale now. I thought I needed the quick reaction of the HMD because he popped up quite close after I took out the flanker. As it is, he was actually severed and he was unable to return fire or defend anyway, so I'm going to pick up a crit and an assist here. After this, we're back onto another example of why you should always fight for the altitude and continue to do so. The other team is on the deck now and I've got a nice top-down position. The problem is I've only got 2 missiles left and I've kind of pigeonholed myself into using my HMD here. Again, should be using TWS, so when I fire at that Typhoon, I could have kept my data link connection on the Hornet. As it is, the Hornet is managing to defeat my missiles. Now, he may have just multi-pathed it and maybe my data link wouldn't have helped, but I've no reason not to use it there. I'm able to nicely slot on his tail though, and I can go for the gun kill. Unfortunately, I of course suck with the guns. I don't get the hit, and before I get a third chance, a teammate takes him out with a missile. Now after this, my mind is completely on RTB and get some more missiles to try and finish off the game, because it doesn't look like anyone is immediately threatening me. But as I start to return to base, I see that Su-30 up there, and he appears to still have missiles whilst I do not. So my only choice here is to try and force a merge, or maybe get some help from my teammates, because I know there was actually a couple of them behind me who took out the Hornets. So I'm on survival here. I'm maximising my chances by first using my periodic countermeasures. You've got near infinite in the GE, so make sure you use it. You can even set it to be more aggressive than this if you want. I'm also both notching and multipathing. I'm looking left occasionally, waiting for him to be spotted. Now I can see him, he's within 5 kilometers, so I start preparing to merge. He does give me one more launch, so I focus on defeating that, and now I'm just trying to cut my speed and make him overshoot. He comes past me quite fast here. I reverse my turn. I can see I'm not quite on his tail yet, so I just dip under the nose, and he just hasn't cut his speed as well as me basically. And I would have had a shot here, but I opt not to take it because I get the missile warning that looked like it was from this Eurofighter ahead of me, but no missile splashes, so I don't know if that was just a false warning of what was going on. Either way, he tries to fire a 9M in the head-on and doesn't look to commit for the guns, so I do commit for the guns. I only get a hit though. Teammate takes out the Su-30, which is helpful because otherwise he would have been dropping in on my tail, and now we're just trying to chase down this Eurofighter. Nothing interesting to see here though. The Euro is obviously faster than me, so I never really get an easy shot as he tries to evade me, running away from me and my teammates. As it is, he eventually just crashes, crediting the kill to me for that hit in the head-on, giving me another ace, so I'm not complaining. Now let's talk about BVR. It's a bit of a meme in War Thunder to be honest, because Fox 3s are pretty easy to defeat. All it usually comes down to is lobbing a few long range shots to pressure some people or hope for a lucky kill, then go off and defend yourself. All it really is when it does happen in any kind of extended fashion like this game here is radar management, awareness and positioning. As always, I'm off on the left to try and get some smaller engagements, and it looks like I've got 3 headed my way. I've deliberately kept myself under 9 kilometers to avoid contrailing, and I'm happy to keep pressing. I have no launch warnings and I can't see any missile contrails ahead of me. As I fire, they all choose to go cold. This allows me to keep pushing round on the left, meaning they're slowly getting enveloped between me and my team in the middle. It also means they don't really know where I am. Sure, they'll see the direction on the RWR, but they don't know the altitude. I just need to be patient now and not wasteful with my missiles. The Euro was down on the deck, so I'm not overly concerned about that. My attention is on the Rafale and flanker. As the Rafale recommits, this shows the strength of my position. They are having to fire at the rest of my team while they turn in, and because missiles travel so fast at this altitude, pulling into the missile I just fired to fire back at me without knowing my exact position is incredibly risky for the Rafale. So whilst they do notch it, they give me their tail, and I'm now on their tail under 10 kilometers, and they finally succumb to the pressure, getting taken out by my AMRAAM. Whilst this is happening, I'm keeping track of the flanker too. Whilst being close to the notch, I have now climbed above them, so I'm happy to fire a missile, and once again you'll see the Datalink benefits, keeping my missile on target, eventually taking them out. For this game I want to look at tunnel vision and how much that leads to poor positioning. This is another common theme of people asking me for help, and in my own gameplay I can point you to many examples as well, like this clip here. My early game involved a lot of defending and no kills. This can easily lead to impatience, which is the enemy of positioning and awareness. As I'm engaging a couple of the higher up targets flying towards the inevitable furball, look at all the incoming targets on my TWS. I did not give any attention to the danger I was flying into and inexplicably decide to start HMD locking the few spotted targets who aren't even a threat to me right now. Do not use your HMD in this airframe unless you need those immediate reactions. I've given up all the information my TWS was providing me. And right now I'm flying over Mach 1.6 directly into their team without even looking at the multiple unspotted enemies coming my way. And this is where the HMD is necessary, as I start rattling off the launches as they all come into view. But I'm only in this situation because of my poor positioning and awareness anyway. This is the classic 16v16 chaos game though. Within half a minute I go from being alive with no kills to being dead with an ace. Now next up, I often get people asking about dealing with long range notching in the early game, and I've never really done a specific video on it because it's just not a particularly interesting video to make for me at least. But I figured I'll chuck a short section in this video, seeing as I'm talking about the Golden Eagle as one of the best BV armobiles, if such a thing even exists in War Thunder. I've compiled a bunch of early game defending clips and sensor view as examples, and now I'm just going to yap. The general point is angle gating is the main complication with notching these days, and that's why I made my last notching video. But I of course spoke pretty much entirely about close range notching. This is because at longer ranges angle gating simply doesn't factor that much. Now I won't go into the full details of why that is, just again go watch Catworther's video linked in the description where he did a bunch of tests to try and figure out how all these mechanics function. But essentially you'll see missiles bite on chaff a lot more in these clips. Whereas if you look at clips of short range notching, like in my short range notching guide, you'll see angle gating come into it a lot more. Now I actually have a threads channel in my Discord server called Help Me Please, where people can post clips or server replays they want tips on, mainly with notching. And 90% of the time the mistake is so simple when we're talking long range. You didn't keep the missile in the notch. I'm forever sending screenshots of someone's RWR where the missile warning is not at 90 degrees. So when you're notching long range using the RWR, keep it at 90. Vary your trajectory and chaff while you do so. If you have a lot of chaff like in the Golden Eagle, honestly feel free to spam it a bit. The breadcrumbing effect isn't really a concern, and the more likely result is you manage to brute force a missile into biting on your chaff anyway. Basically, I can't recall a single occasion that chaffing too much got me killed. I can recall plenty where not chaffing enough did. And that will be all from me today. As always, I'll chuck one more game on for the outro. I've also left some useful links in the description and a pinned comment, Catworther's video, which I mentioned a few times, and also both my close range notching and Datalink defense videos, as I don't really talk much about defending in this one. The latter being where you should go if you've been watching the offensive Datalink clips in this video wondering, okay, but what do I do on the receiving end? I also briefly mentioned the Help Me channel on my Discord server, so if you want to pop a clip or server replay in there for some help, feel free. It's incredibly hard to help someone asking about what they're doing wrong in YouTube comments without a clip or replay for reference. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you again next time.